March 15th, 1973. Golden Harvest Studios, Hong Kong. Chen Wei-ming watched his two best friends destroy each other in 60 seconds of film that would never see daylight. Jackie Chan lay writhing on the concrete floor. Bruce Lee stood over him, fists still clenched. The weight of silence. Chen Wei-ming's arthritic fingers trembled as he rewound the film projector for the 100th time that evening. The mechanical clicking echoed through his cramped Chinatown apartment like bones breaking, a sound that had haunted him for 50 years. Outside his window, the neon glow of Grant Avenue cast shadows that danced across stacks of yellowing newspapers, each one containing another lie about that day. The footage flickered to life again. March 15th, 1973. Golden Harvest Studios. There was Jackie, 21 and electric with ambition, executing the spinning kick that should have been his breakthrough moment. There was Bruce, already a legend at 32, his eyes cold and calculating in a way the public never saw. And there, behind the camera, was Chen himself, 47 and foolish enough to believe friendship could survive what money and fame could corrupt. Chen paused the frame just before impact. Jackie's leg extended in perfect form, Bruce's hand positioned to deflect. It looked like choreography. It looked like art. It looked like an accident waiting to happen. Chen knew better. He had been the one to mix Bruce's pre-workout drink that morning, the one laced with enough amphetamines to fuel a racehorse. He had watched Bruce's pupils dilate during the rehearsal, seen the micro-tremor in his hands that meant the dosage was too high. Chen had tried to call for a break, but Bruce waved him off with manic intensity. One more take, Wei-ming. Make it perfect. Perfect. The word tasted like ash now. The projector's bulb flickered, casting the room into momentary darkness. In that split second, Chen saw not his reflection in the black screen, but Jackie's face from the hospital, pale, confused, asking why he couldn't feel his legs. The doctors had called it a freak accident, a miscalculated block that sent Jackie's spine into the concrete floor. Bruce had visited once, flowers in hand and tears in his eyes that seemed genuine enough to fool everyone except Chen. He knew about the rivalry that had been festering between the two young stars. Jackie's natural charisma threatening Bruce's carefully cultivated mystique. The studio executives whispering about Jackie being the next big thing, younger and more marketable. And most dangerously, Jackie's growing suspicions about Bruce's dramatic physical transformation over the past 6 months. "What's he taking, Wei-ming?" Jackie had asked just 3 days before the accident. Nobody builds muscle that fast without help. Chen had deflected then, loyal to Bruce's secrets. Now, watching the frozen frame of Jackie's trusting face, that loyalty felt like betrayal of the worst kind. The apartment's radiator clanked to life, startling Chen from his reverie. Mrs. Wong from downstairs was cooking again, the smell of star anise and ginger seeping through the thin walls. Normal sounds of normal lives, while Chen sat surrounded by the detritus of his exile. 50 years of Chinese newspapers, martial arts magazines, and film industry trade publications, all chronicling the careers that had flourished while his own died that day on the soundstage. After the accident, Chen had tried to speak up, had gone to the studio heads with his concerns about Bruce's drug use, about the suspicious timing of Jackie's injury. But Bruce Lee was Golden Harvest's golden goose, and Chen was just a fight choreographer who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. His concerns were noted, filed away, and forgotten. His contracts mysteriously dried up. His calls went unreturned. Within 6 months, he was blacklisted from every major studio in Hong Kong. Within a year, Bruce was dead from brain swelling, taking his secrets to the grave. Within 2 years, Chen was washing dishes in a San Francisco restaurant, watching Jackie Chan's miraculous recovery and subsequent rise to stardom from half a world away. The media had celebrated Jackie's triumph over adversity, his determined rehabilitation from paralysis to action superstar. Only Chen knew the rehabilitation had been suspiciously quick, the medical records curiously vague. But what could one broken old man do against a legend? The projector clicked to a stop, the film reel spinning empty. Chen's evening ritual was complete, as it had been every night for the past 3 months since the mysterious package had arrived. No return address, no note, just a film canister wrapped in brown paper with his name written in careful Chinese characters. Inside, 60 seconds of footage that could destroy everything. The clock on his wall chimed midnight. March 15th had officially become March 16th. The anniversary had passed again. Chen stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement, and walked to his small kitchenette. As he reached for the kettle to make tea, something crinkled under his door. Another envelope, this late at night. Chen's blood turned to ice as he recognized the same careful handwriting. But this envelope was thicker, heavier. And in the bottom right corner, pressed into the paper like a signature, was a small red seal. The same seal Jackie Chan had used on his personal correspondence 50 years ago. Chen's hands shook as he realized that after 5 decades of silence, someone wanted to talk. Chen's hand hovered over the envelope for what felt like hours, though his wall clock measured mere minutes. The red wax seal caught the flickering light from his projector, and for a moment he was 25 again, sitting in Bruce's cramped Hong Kong apartment as Jackie sealed his first fan letter with that same careful precision. Jackie had been so proud of that seal, a gift from his opera master, pressing it into the warm wax with the solemnity of an emperor signing edicts. The memory made Chen's chest tighten. These boys he had known, trained with, laughed with over late-night dim sum runs between filming, before the drugs, before the ambition, before everything had gone so terribly wrong, back when martial arts was about discipline and honor, not box office receipts. Chen's knees creaked as he bent to retrieve the envelope. His arthritis was always worse on damp nights like this, when the San Francisco fog rolled in thick enough to muffle the sounds of traffic below. The weight of the package surprised him. Whatever was inside wasn't just paper. Something metallic shifted within. He carried it to his small dining table, pushing aside a half-finished bowl of congee grown cold hours ago. The overhead bulb cast harsh shadows, making the careful Chinese characters seem to dance. Chen recognized the calligraphy style now, the precise strokes Jackie had perfected during their opera school days, when they'd spend hours practicing forms until their legs shook with exhaustion. But Jackie's hands had been still for 50 years, hadn't they? Chen's fingers traced the seal without breaking it. In all his years of exile, he had protected 2 things above all else: his granddaughter Mei Lin's weekly phone calls from Portland, and the small shrine he kept for his wife Lily, dead now 15 years. Lily had never known the full truth about why they'd fled Hong Kong so suddenly, why her husband's promising career had crumbled overnight. She'd simply packed their few belongings and followed him to America, never questioning, never blaming. "Some secrets are too heavy for one person to carry alone," she'd told him once near the end. But Chen had carried this one anyway, watching it hollow him out year by year like water wearing away stone. The radiator clanked again, and Mrs. Wong's television murmured through the thin walls. A late-night Cantonese drama, the kind Lily used to watch while Chen graded his Tai Chi students' forms. Simple routines, simple pleasures. The life he'd built here in Chinatown was small but clean, measured in familiar faces at the morning market, and the satisfied exhaustion of teaching neighborhood kids basic forms in Portsmouth Square. Mei Lin's graduation photo smiled at him from the mantel beside Lily's shrine. Stanford Medical School, first in her family to become a doctor. She called every Sunday at exactly 7 p.m., her voice bright with stories of residency rotations and the young man she was dating, a kind accountant named David who made her laugh. Chen lived for those calls, for the proof that some good had survived his failures. What would happen to that fragile peace if the truth finally surfaced? If his name was dragged through international headlines, if journalists descended on his quiet street like vultures? Mei Lin didn't even know about his former life in the film industry. To her, he was simply grandfather, who taught her basic self-defense and made the best wontons in Chinatown. Chen's thumb worked at the seal's edge, not quite breaking the wax. Steam rose from the kettle he'd forgotten on the burner, filling the apartment with the whistle of boiling water. The sound reminded him of the studio lot's tea cart, how Jackie would always add too much sugar while Bruce drank his black and bitter. How naive they'd all been, thinking their brotherhood would survive success. Chen remembered the exact moment he'd known everything was changing. Bruce returning from his first Hollywood meetings, eyes bright with possibilities and paranoia in equal measure. The boy who'd once shared his lunch money had become a man who saw threats in every shadow, competition in every smile. "Promise me something, Wei Ming." Bruce had said that last night, before the accident. "If anything happens to me, protect what we built. The legend matters more than the man." Chen had promised, thinking Bruce meant his reputation, his films. Only later did he understand. Bruce had known the drugs would kill him eventually. The promise had been about silence, about letting the world remember a hero instead of an addict. But that promise had cost Jackie his truth, whatever that truth might be. The kettle's whistle grew urgent, piercing. Chen stood slowly, turned off the burner, then returned to the table. The envelope waited, patient as a sleeping dragon. Outside, foghorns mourned across the bay, and somewhere in the distance, a night bus wheezed to a stop. Chen broke the seal. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a key. Not modern, but old brass, the kind that might open a safety deposit box or a storage unit. Wrapped around it was a single sheet of paper with an address he didn't recognize and a time, tomorrow, noon. At the bottom, in that same careful calligraphy, "The performance ends now." Chen stared at the key until his vision blurred, the brass surface reflecting the harsh overhead light like a small accusatory sun. His fingers had gone numb, whether from the cold or shock he couldn't tell. The address meant nothing to him, 1247 Bryant Street, Unit 7B. Somewhere in the Mission District, a part of the city he hadn't visited in decades. The tea water had gone silent, steam no longer rising from the kettle's spout. The apartment felt suddenly airless, as if the walls were pressing inward. Chen's chest constricted with each breath, the familiar tightness that came when his memories grew too heavy. He reached for his pill bottle, the heart medication Dr. Patel had prescribed after his episode last winter, but his hands shook too violently to manage the child-proof cap. The performance ends now. What performance? The careful charade he'd maintained for 50 years, living as a broken exile while the truth festered inside him like an infected wound. Or something else entirely, something that suggested Jackie's own performance had been far more elaborate than Chen had ever imagined. The phone rang. Chen's head snapped up, adrenaline flooding his system. The ancient rotary phone on his kitchen counter, the same model Lily had insisted on keeping because new things break too easily, jangled with mechanical persistence. The sound was wrong, all wrong. Nobody called this late except emergencies, except... "Wei Ba?" Mei Lin's voice crackled through the receiver when Chen finally managed to lift it with trembling hands, but something was off. Her usual Sunday evening cheerfulness had been replaced by something strained, careful. "Mei Lin? It's very late, child. Are you—" "I'm sorry to call so late, Wei Ba. I know it's not Sunday, but—" Her voice trailed off, and Chen could hear traffic in the background, the distant hum of late-night San Francisco. "I'm downstairs. In my car. Can I come up?" Chen's blood turned to ice. Mei Lin lived 4 hours away in Portland, had never visited unannounced, had never... "What are you doing here?" The words came out harsher than he'd intended, sharpened by 50 years of paranoia finally finding a target. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the static of the old phone line and the sound of Chen's own ragged breathing. When Mei Lin spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Someone came to see me today, Wei Ba. Someone who knew things about you, about us, about..." Another pause, longer this time. "About 1973. The receiver slipped from Chen's nerveless fingers, clattering against the wall before swinging on its cord like a pendulum. He could hear Mei Lin's voice calling his name, distant and tinny, but the sound seemed to come from another world entirely. His legs gave way, and he found himself sitting heavily in his kitchen chair, staring at the brass key that had started this nightmare. Whoever had sent the film footage, whoever was using Jackie's seal, they weren't content to let the past stay buried. They were pulling his granddaughter into this web of deception and betrayal, threatening the only pure thing left in his carefully constructed exile. Chen forced himself to pick up the phone again. "Come up," he managed, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. "But Mei Lin, be careful who follows you." 10 minutes later, Chen heard her familiar footsteps on the narrow staircase, quick, light steps that reminded him achingly of Lily at that age. But when Mei Lin appeared in his doorway, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her Stanford medical sweatshirt wrinkled from hours of driving, Chen saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Fear. But underneath it, something worse. Recognition. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, his granddaughter knew about the secrets he'd spent half a century protecting. "Wei Ba," she said softly, closing the door behind her with exaggerated care. "We need to talk about Bruce Lee, about Jackie Chan, and about why a very polite old man with a Hong Kong accent spent 3 hours in my apartment today showing me photographs I'm pretty sure were supposed to stay buried forever." Chen's carefully constructed world, his small apartment, his quiet routine, his protective silence, cracked like ice under sudden pressure. The brass key seemed to burn against his palm where he'd unconsciously closed his fist around it. After 50 years of carrying his burden alone, the past had finally found him. And it hadn't come gently, with time to prepare or plan. It had come like an earthquake, sudden and devastating, threatening to bring down everything he'd built to protect the people he loved. The performance, as the letter had promised, was indeed ending now, and Chen realized with growing horror that he had no idea who had been directing it all along. Chen's mind reeled, searching desperately for words that might somehow undo what had already been set in motion. The brass key cut into his palm as his fist tightened involuntarily. "You must be mistaken," he said, the lie cracking in his throat like old paper. "I don't know what this man told you, but—" "Wei Ba." Mei Lin's voice carried the gentle firmness she used with difficult patience. She moved into the apartment's dim light, and Chen saw exhaustion etched around her eyes. He knew about the scar on your left shoulder, the one from the broken bottle when you were 8. He knew grandmother's maiden name. He knew about the jade bracelet you sold to pay for my textbooks sophomore year, the one you told me was lost. Each revelation hit Chen like a physical blow. The jade bracelet had been Lily's most treasured possession, a wedding gift from her mother. He'd sold it quietly to a Chinatown dealer, telling Mei Lin it had simply disappeared one day. Only 3 people had known the truth: himself, the dealer, and— what did he look like? Chen's voice came out as a whisper. Mei Lin pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "He said you'd want to see this." The screen showed a photograph clearly taken in her Portland apartment. Chen recognized the blue couch he'd helped her pick out, the medical textbooks stacked on her coffee table. But it was the man in the photo that made Chen's world tilt sideways. Gray-haired, distinguished, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the compact build of someone who'd spent decades training his body as a weapon. The face was older, more weathered, but the eyes were unmistakable. Eyes Chen had watched grow cold and calculating 50 years ago. Eyes that had belonged to a young man whose ambition had consumed everything in its path. "No," Chen breathed. "That's impossible. He's dead. I saw the funeral. Wei Ba. Who is he?" Mei Lin's voice cut through his spiral of disbelief. "He wouldn't tell me his name. Just kept saying you'd understand when you saw the picture. He was so polite, so careful not to frighten me, but—" She shuddered. There was something underneath, something that made me want to lock every door and window after he left. Chen's legs gave way completely. He collapsed into his worn armchair, the same chair where he'd held Mei Lin as a child, reading her stories in careful English while she corrected his pronunciation. The apartment around him, his sanctuary for 5 decades, suddenly felt like a trap. "We have to leave," he said suddenly, struggling to rise. "Right now. Pack nothing, just—" "Wei Ba, stop!" Mei Lin knelt beside his chair, her medical training taking over as she checked his pulse with gentle fingers. "You're having a panic attack. Your heart rate is through the roof. Tell me what's happening. Who is this man?" But Chen couldn't form the words. How could he explain that the dead had apparently risen? That the friend whose funeral he'd watched from the back row of a Hong Kong cemetery, whose death had freed him from at least one portion of his guilt, had somehow walked into his granddaughter's apartment 24 hours ago? The brass key lay on his coffee table where he'd dropped it, catching the light like an accusation. Chen forced himself to focus on it, to think past the terror flooding his system. If Bruce was alive, And that photograph made denial impossible. Then everything Chen had believed for 50 years was a lie. The guilt he'd carried, the exile he'd accepted, the silence he'd maintained to protect a dead man's reputation, all of it built on deception. "He gave me something else," Mei Lin said quietly. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Said to give it to you only if you recognized him from the photo." Chen's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single ticket stub, yellowed with age. Shaw Brothers Studios, Very Important Persons section, dated July 20th, 1973, the day of Bruce's funeral. Beneath it, a note in familiar handwriting, row 12, seat 7. "You always were too sentimental, Wei Ming. Tomorrow, noon. Come alone or she disappears like Jackie did." The apartment's walls seemed to press closer. Chen could hear Mrs. Wang's television murmuring below, the normal sounds of normal lives, while his own existence cracked apart like glass under pressure. Bruce had seen him at the funeral, had known for 50 years exactly where Chen was, what he was doing, who he cared about, had been watching, waiting. "Wei Ba?" Mei Lin's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're scaring me. What does it say?" Chen looked at his granddaughter, brilliant, kind, innocent of the darkness that had shaped his life, and realized with crystalline clarity that his decades of protective silence had accomplished nothing. The past wasn't buried, it had simply been biding its time, and now it wanted to collect. Chen stared at his granddaughter's frightened face and felt something break inside his chest. Not his failing heart, but something deeper. The careful wall he'd built between his past and present, brick by brick, year by year, crumbled in an instant. "His name was Bruce Lee," Chen said, his voice hollow as an empty grave. "And if he's alive, then I've been living a lie for 50 years. Mei Lin's eyes widened. "Bruce Lee? But he died when you were young, you told me." "I told you many things." Chen's words tasted like ashes, all of them true, none of them complete. He reached for the ticket stub with trembling fingers. The paper felt fragile enough to disintegrate at his touch, but the ink remained sharp and clear. Row 12, seat 7. He remembered now, the crushing weight of grief, the suffocating humidity of Hong Kong in July, the way his black funeral suit had stuck to his skin as he'd watched them lower an empty coffin into the ground. Empty. It had to have been empty. "Wei Ba, you're scaring me." Mei Lin's medical training warred with her fear as she monitored his breathing. "Whatever happened back then, we can handle it. Together." But Chen was drowning in memories now, 50 years of carefully suppressed guilt flooding back with interest. "You don't understand, child. If Bruce is alive," his voice cracked, "then Jackie Chan may be dead, really dead, and the words lodged in his throat like broken glass. "Jackie Chan is fine," Mei Lin said with the patience of someone humoring a delirious patient. "I saw him in a movie last month. He's doing insurance commercials now, still doing his own stunts at 70. "No." Chen's whisper cut through her reassurance like a blade. "The Jackie Chan you know isn't real. The man I knew, the boy who sealed letters with red wax and spent hours perfecting his calligraphy." Chen's hands shook as he touched the envelope. "He disappeared 50 years ago. What you've seen, what the world has seen, that's someone else wearing his face." The apartment's silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of Mrs. Wang's television and the foghorns crying across the bay. Mei Lin's face had gone pale, her medical rationality struggling against the impossible. "That's crazy, Wei Ba. People don't just replace other people. Not for 50 years. Not. In Hong Kong in the 70s, anything was possible if you had enough money, enough connections." Chen's voice grew stronger as the truth began pouring out, decades of silence breaking like a dam. Plastic surgery was crude but effective. The real Jackie was small, delicate. Perfect bone structure for modification. And if someone needed him gone, if he knew something that could destroy careers, reputations. Chen forced himself to stand, his arthritis screaming in protest. He walked to the window, staring down at the empty street where shadows pooled like spilled ink. "I thought Bruce died of an allergic reaction. Natural causes, tragic but clean. It let me tell myself that the secret died with him, that my silence protected everyone who remained. His reflection stared back from the glass, an old man haunted by choices made in youth. But if he's been alive all this time, watching, waiting, what secret? Mei Lin's voice was barely audible. Chen's breath fogged the window as he spoke. Bruce was using drugs, not recreational, performance enhancers, experimental stimulants that made him faster, stronger, superhuman. The studios knew, the directors knew, but nobody cared as long as the box office numbers climbed. He turned back to face his granddaughter. Jackie found out, threatened to expose everything unless Bruce came clean. And Bruce arranged an accident, made it look like Jackie fell during a stunt, broke his spine. But I was there, behind the camera. I saw Bruce adjust the rigging, saw him calculate the angle. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. I saw him smile when Jackie hit the ground. The brass key caught the overhead light, throwing tiny reflections across the ceiling like scattered stars. Chen picked it up, feeling its weight, heavier than it should be, as if it contained more than just metal. The man who replaced Jackie must have known the truth too. Probably they both did. The surgery, the deception, all of it orchestrated to keep Bruce's secret buried. Chen's fingers closed around the key. And now Bruce wants to collect on 50 years of my silence. Wants to finish what he started. Mei Lin stood slowly, her movements careful and controlled. We're going to the police. Right now. If this man threatened you, if he... With what evidence? A photograph and a letter? Chen laughed bitterly. They'll think I'm a delusional old man living in conspiracy theories. And meanwhile, Bruce will simply disappear again. Take you with him this time. The apartment felt smaller now, contaminated by truth. Chen realized that his exile hadn't been protection at all. It had been a cage, and Bruce had held the key all along. Now he wanted Chen to come collect his freedom. At noon tomorrow. Alone. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Chen watched his granddaughter's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and something approaching acceptance. The kind of clinical detachment she'd learned in medical school when confronted with impossible diagnoses. Show me the film, Mei Lin said quietly. Chen blinked. What? You said you were behind the camera. You said you saw Bruce adjust the rigging, saw him smile. Her voice carried that same gentle firmness, but underneath it was steel. If you were the choreographer, the camera operator, there would be footage. Show me. The brass key seemed to burn in Chen's palm. He'd carried this story for so long, polished it in his memory until every detail gleamed with terrible clarity. But now, faced with Mei Lin's medical precision, the edges began to blur. Wei Ba, Mei Lin's eyes never left his face. I've spent 4 years learning to spot lies. Patients lie about symptoms, about compliance, about pain levels. You're lying now. She paused, studying him with uncomfortable intensity. You weren't behind the camera that day, were you? Chen's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The story that had sustained him through 50 years of exile suddenly felt hollow, like a house built on sand. He tried to remember Bruce's smile, the calculated adjustment of rigging, but the images wavered like heat mirages. His voice cracked. I was supposed to be. Bruce asked me to operate the camera for the stunt sequence, said he wanted someone he trusted to capture it properly. But that morning The truth hit him like ice water. He'd been drunk, spectacularly, shamefully drunk on cheap whiskey, drowning his sorrows over a girl whose name he could no longer recall. He'd arrived on set 3 hours late, reeking of alcohol and regret, to find the stunt already completed and Jackie Chan being loaded into an ambulance. You weren't there, Mei Lin said softly. It wasn't a question. No. The word came out as a whisper. Bruce told me what happened. Said Jackie had fallen during a routine take, that the rigging had failed. But I knew about the drugs, knew Jackie was asking questions, and Chen's legs gave way again, depositing him heavily in his chair. I convinced myself Bruce had done it deliberately. It made more sense than random accident. It gave my guilt purpose. The apartment around them seemed to shift and settle, as if the weight of 50 years of self-deception was finally pressing it into its true shape. Chen stared at his hands. Old now, spotted with age, but once steady enough to frame perfect shots, to choreograph fights that looked like deadly ballet. "You've been protecting a lie," Mei Lin said. "Not Bruce's lie, your own." The brass key dropped from his nerveless fingers, clattering against the coffee table. Chen realized with growing horror that every decision he'd made since 1973, his exile from Hong Kong, his refusal to work in film, his careful isolation in this cramped apartment, had been built on a foundation of guilt that was itself a fiction. "But the drugs were real," he said desperately, grasping for some thread of truth. "Bruce was using them, I know he was. I saw the bottles, the needles." "Insulin," Mei Lin said quietly. "Wei Ba, I looked up Bruce Lee's medical records when that man visited me. I needed to understand what he was talking about. Bruce was diabetic, type 1. He hid it from the studios because it would have ended his career, but the performance-enhancing drugs you saw were just insulin injections." The walls of Chen's constructed reality crumbled completely. Bruce hadn't been a calculating killer, just a sick man desperate to hide his condition in an industry that demanded physical perfection. Jackie's accident had been exactly that, an accident. And Chen's 50 years of exile had been penance for a crime that existed only in his guilt-addled imagination. "Then who sent the film?" he whispered. "Who has Jackie's seal?" Mei Lin reached into her jacket again, pulling out another photograph. This one showed the same distinguished older man, but the image was clearer, the lighting better. And in the background, Chen could see something that made his blood freeze. A wheelchair. "He didn't tell me his name," Mei Lin said, "but he did tell me one thing. He said to tell you that 50 years was long enough to let you punish yourself for something you didn't do, and that if you came to the address tomorrow, he could finally show you who Bruce Lee really was." Chen stared at the photograph, at the man he'd convinced himself was his dead friend risen from the grave. The face was wrong for Bruce, too soft, too kind, but it was exactly right for someone else, someone Chen had written off as broken and finished 50 years ago. "Jackie," he breathed. "You've been alive all this time." And suddenly, impossibly, Chen understood. The greatest deception in martial arts history wasn't about replacing Jackie Chan. It was about making the world believe Bruce Lee had ever existed at all. The photograph slipped from Chen's fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dying moth. He stared at Mei Lin, his mind reeling as decades of assumptions collapsed into dust. If Jackie was alive, if he'd been alive all along, then everything Chen thought he understood about that summer in 1973 was wrong. "I need to call him," Chen said suddenly, lurching toward the old rotary phone on his kitchen counter. "If Jackie's been watching me, if he knows where I am, then I need to—" "Wei Ba, stop." Mei Lin caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Think about what you're saying. If this man is really Jackie Chan, why wait 50 years to contact you? Why send mysterious packages and threaten?" "Because I abandoned him." The words tore from Chen's throat like a confession ripped from a dying man. "When he was broken and helpless, I ran. I left Hong Kong because I couldn't face what I'd seen, or what I thought I'd seen." His voice cracked. "I left my best friend to suffer alone." But even as he spoke, Chen's mind was working, parsing the implications with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan fight sequences. If Jackie had survived the accident, if he'd recovered enough to function in the world, why had the film industry replaced him so completely? The Jackie Chan the world knew had emerged in the late 70s, nearly 5 years after the accident. 5 years was enough time for reconstructive surgery, for rehabilitation, for identity replacement, Chen whispered. "But not the way I thought." Mei Lin frowned. "What do you mean?" Chen began pacing his small living room, his arthritis forgotten as his mind raced through possibilities. "I assumed Bruce had Jackie killed and replaced. But what if it was Jackie himself? What if the accident was so severe that when he recovered he was—" Chen paused, staring at the wheelchair visible in the photograph. Different, damaged, unable to perform the way he once had. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Chen remembered the insurance policies, the studio contracts that required stars to maintain specific physical capabilities. A paralyzed action star would be worthless, but a replacement who could channel Jackie's essence while possessing full mobility. "They gave him a new life," Chen breathed. a stand-in who could be everything Jackie could no longer be. And in return, Jackie got to watch his own legacy unfold from the shadows. Mei Lin picked up the fallen photograph, studying the man's face with her trained eye for detail. If that's true, if he's been watching you all this time, what does he want now? The brass key caught the light again, and Chen finally understood its significance. Not a key to physical space, but to understanding. Jackie hadn't sent the film to torment him. He'd sent it to prepare him for the truth. He wants to tell me about Bruce, Chen said slowly. The real Bruce. Not the legend, not the icon, but the man who died 50 years ago, while his friend convinced himself of elaborate conspiracies rather than face simple grief. Chen's phone rang, the harsh sound cutting through the apartment like a blade. They both froze, staring at the ancient rotary device as it continued its insistent summons. Chen had received perhaps 20 phone calls in the past decade, most of them wrong numbers or Mei Lin checking in. This wasn't either. On the fourth ring, Chen lifted the receiver with trembling hands. Wei? Chen Wei Ming. The voice was older now, weathered by decades in pain, but unmistakably familiar. Chen's knees buckled. My old friend, it's been too long. Jackie Chen's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're really alive. Disappointed? There was warmth in the voice, tinged with sadness. I know you preferred me as a tragic victim of your imagination. Mei Lin moved closer, trying to hear both sides of the conversation. Chen gestured for her to pick up the kitchen extension, his hands shaking too violently to manage both tasks. Where are you? Chen asked. Close enough to see your apartment. Far enough away that you can't run this time. Jackie's voice carried a weight of old hurt, though I understand the impulse. You always were better at choreographing escapes than confrontations. I thought you were dead, Chen said. I thought Bruce had... Bruce died in my arms, Jackie interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. July 20th, 1973, in a hotel room in Kowloon while you were convincing yourself he was a monster. He asked for you at the end, Wei Ming. Asked me to forgive you for not being there when he needed you most. The words hit Chen like physical blows. Through the kitchen extension, he could hear Mei Lin's sharp intake of breath. The drugs, Chen began, kept him alive for 3 extra months. Jackie's voice softened. Long enough to finish his last film, long enough to say goodbye, properly, if his best friend hadn't been drowning in a bottle somewhere in Aberdeen. Chen closed his eyes, finally understanding the true scope of his failure. He'd built 50 years of exile on a lie, but the real crime wasn't imaginary conspiracy. It was abandonment. It was letting fear and guilt drive him away when the people he loved needed him most. Tomorrow, Jackie said quietly. Noon. It's time you learned who your friend really was. The line went dead, leaving Chen staring at the silent receiver, finally ready to face the truth he'd been running from for half a century. Chen didn't sleep. He sat in his chair through the night, watching fog roll past his window like ghosts of memory, the brass key warm in his palm. When dawn finally broke gray and muted over Chinatown, he was already dressed in his one good suit, the same black wool he'd worn to Bruce's funeral 50 years ago. Mei Lin had tried to stay, but Chen had sent her away with gentle firmness. This confrontation belonged to him alone. The address Jackie had given him led to Portsmouth Square, the heart of old Chinatown where elderly men gathered each morning to play xiangqi and gossip in languages their grandchildren had forgotten. Chen arrived early, his breath visible in the cold air, and found Jackie waiting on a bench beneath the pagoda-style pavilion. The wheelchair was gone. Jackie sat upright, his back straight despite the years, wearing a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. His hair was white now, his face lined but unmistakably the same delicate features Chen remembered from their youth. He was feeding pigeons from a paper bag, his movements economical and precise. You look older, Jackie said without turning around. 50 years of guilt will do that to a man. Chen approached slowly, his arthritis making each step deliberate. You look. He paused, studying his old friend's posture, the way his hands moved with their familiar grace. You look like yourself. I am myself. Jackie scattered another handful of breadcrumbs. The pigeons descended in a flutter of gray wings. I always was. The world simply decided I was someone else. Chen sat beside him on the bench, leaving careful space between them. Around the square, morning activity continued. Vendors setting up fruit stands, children walking to school, the eternal rhythm of a neighborhood that had survived wars and recessions and the endless churn of history. The man the world knows as Jackie Chan, Chen began. Is my cousin. Jackie's voice held no bitterness, only tired acceptance. Li Weidong. He always looked like me, even as children. When the accident left me. Jackie gestured vaguely at his legs, which Chen now noticed remained perfectly still. The studios had invested too much money to simply write off Jackie Chan. Weidong needed work, and I needed to disappear. Why? Jackie was quiet for a long moment, watching the pigeons squabble over crumbs. Because I killed Bruce Lee. The words hung in the cold air between them like an indictment. Chen felt his chest tighten, all his old fears and suspicions rushing back. Not the way you imagined, Jackie continued softly. No conspiracies, no calculated murder, just a stupid, proud young man who thought he knew better than doctors. He turned to face Chen for the first time, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Bruce was dying, Wei Ming. The diabetes, the medications, the stress of hiding his condition, his body was failing. He had maybe 6 months left. Chen's throat felt raw. The insulin wasn't enough anymore. He needed experimental treatments, gene therapy that was barely theoretical in 1973. The only doctor willing to try it was in Switzerland, but the cost… Jackie shook his head. Bruce would have bankrupted himself and died anyway. So I convinced him to try something else first. What? Traditional medicine. Herbs, acupuncture, meditation. I found an old master in the New Territories who claimed he could cure diabetes through Qi manipulation. Jackie's laugh was bitter as winter wind. I was so sure, so convinced that Western medicine was failing him, and our ancestors held the answers. I made Bruce stop taking his insulin. The truth hit Chen like a physical blow. Jackie, no. He lasted 3 days. 3 days of agony while his body shut down, while I watched my best friend die because I was too arrogant to admit I was wrong. Jackie's voice broke. He forgave me at the end, said he understood why I tried, but I never forgave myself. Around them, the square continued its morning bustle, oblivious to the confession of a man who had carried 50 years of genuine guilt while his friend had tortured himself with imaginary crimes. The accident, Chen whispered, was me throwing myself off a building. Jackie's admission was matter-of-fact, clinical. I couldn't live with what I'd done. The fall should have killed me, but it only broke my spine. Divine punishment, perhaps, or cosmic irony. Chen reached out instinctively, his hand covering Jackie's on the bench. His friend's fingers were cold but alive, beautifully alive. Why tell me now? Jackie smiled then, the same gentle expression Chen remembered from their youth. Because you've been punishing yourself for my crimes long enough. Because Bruce loved you like a brother, and you dishonored that love by believing he was capable of evil. His voice grew stronger. And because I'm dying, Wei Ming, really dying this time, cancer, and I wanted to make sure the truth survived me. In the distance, temple bells began to chime noon. Chen squeezed his old friend's hand and finally, after 50 years of running, chose to stay. The bells faded into silence, leaving only the soft murmur of the square around them. Chen felt something shift inside his chest, not breaking but settling, like a bone that had been set wrong finally finding its proper place. How long? He asked quietly. 6 months, maybe less. Jackie's voice held the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used to describe his suicide attempt. Lung cancer. Ironic, considering I never smoked. But then, my life has been built on ironies. Chen studied his friend's profile, seeing now what he'd missed in his initial shock, the slight hollowness beneath the eyes, the careful way Jackie held himself, as if movement required conscious effort. Death was already there, patient and inevitable, but Jackie faced it with the same quiet dignity he'd brought to everything else. The film footage you sent, Chen said, was it real? Real footage of a practice session, nothing more. Bruce was teaching me a new sequence, something he'd been developing for his next project. Jackie's smile was faint but genuine. He always said the camera loved me better than him. Too bad the world never got to see what he meant. Around them, life continued its ancient patterns. An old woman fed cats near the memorial statue. Children chased each other between the benches, their laughter bright as temple bells. The world that had made legends of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, that had built monuments to their friendship and rivalry, remained oblivious to the truth being shared on a simple wooden bench. "I should have been there," Chen said, the words scraping his throat raw. "When Bruce was dying, when you were suffering, I should have stayed. We all should have done many things differently." Jackie turned his face toward the weak morning sun. "But we were young and proud and convinced that our pain was unique in all the world. Youth makes philosophers of fools and cowards of wise men." Chen thought of his cramped apartment, his 50 years of self-imposed exile, the careful loneliness he'd cultivated like a garden of thorns. All of it built on the foundation of a story he'd told himself because the truth, that he'd simply been absent when needed most, was too simple, too human to bear. "What happens now?" Chen asked. "Now you choose." Jackie's grip on the bench tightened slightly, the only sign of the effort it cost him to sit upright. "You can return to your apartment, to your exile, and carry this new guilt alongside the old. Or you can help me with something, anything. I want to make a film. Nothing grand, nothing the world will ever see. Just the three of us, you, me, and Bruce, the way we should have been. The way we were before pride and fear and stupid choices tore us apart." Chen felt tears he'd held back for decades finally break free. "How?" Jackie reached into his jacket with careful movements and withdrew a small digital camera, modern technology incongruous in his weathered hands. "You teach me to use this device, and I'll show you something I've been working on for 50 years. Letters Bruce wrote, stories he wanted to tell, dreams he never got to share. His real legacy, not the legend the world created from his death." The morning fog was lifting now, revealing the city beyond the square in sharp detail. San Francisco stretched away from them in all directions, a place where Chen had hidden from the world, but where Jackie, it seemed, had been waiting patiently for this moment of reconciliation. "There's a small park in the Sunset District," Jackie continued. "Quiet, overlooked, good light in the afternoons. Bruce used to talk about shooting there someday, said it reminded him of the hills above Hong Kong." Chen nodded, unable to speak. In his mind, he could already see the shots. Simple compositions, nothing fancy, just three old friends finally telling their true story. Not the myth of the martial arts legend, not the tragedy of the paralyzed star, but the smaller, more human truth of love and loss and the weight of choices made in youth. "We'll need to work quickly," Jackie said, struggling to his feet with Chen's help. 6 months isn't much time to undo 50 years of lies. As they walked slowly across the square together, Chen felt the city around him differently than he had in decades. No longer a place of exile, but simply home, complicated and painful and beautiful, like all true homes. The brass key in his pocket caught the light one final time before he let it fall through a crack in the pavement, where it would rest forgotten among a million other small mysteries. Behind them, the pigeons resumed their eternal squabbling over crumbs. Ahead, 2 old men walked toward whatever time remained, carrying between them the weight of truth finally shared and the lightness of stories that could, at last, be told.